This comparative study illustrates how The Witch and Daughters of Darkness both use the supernatural horror genre to allow women to reclaim society's fear of women's sexuality. The Witch is a 2015 folk horror film directed by Robert Eggers. It is set in 1630 New England, when a devout Puritan family is kicked out of their plantation colony due to the father's pride against the church. The family lives in the wilderness to be closer to God. One day, though, the baby disappears under the eldest daughter, Thomasin's, watch. The family blames Thomasin and slowly falls into madness as more tragedy strikes. It places Thomasin, the oldest child who has come into maturity, as a central figure as the family slowly turns against her. It is subtitled as a New England folktale and is exactly that. The family faces fears of demons, witches, and that fear is always present. Daughters of Darkness is a horror film from 1971 from Henry Kummel that follows a newlywed couple, Stefan and Valerie. They stop at a French resort in its off-season when they meet the Countess Batory and her quote-unquote assistant, Ilona. The Countess takes a quick liking to Valerie, which turns to obsession. Oh, and Batory and Ilona are lesbian vampires. It's an English-language Belgian film heavily influenced by European art house styles and is glamorized and stylized. It was among the first films to introduce to America a new wave of sexual liberation in film. The horror genre. Horror is a genre that can say a lot about a society, because the popular subcategories of the genre usually reflect a society's cultural fears. An age-old fear of society is women's sexuality. Carol Clover discussed this idea in her book, Men, Women, and Chainsaws: Gender in the Modern Horror Film. Horror is one of the only genres where there are actually more female lead characters than male, largely due to the idea of the final girl. She is the girl who survives the monster of the film, likely due to her resourcefulness, toughness, and purity. She is respected because she takes on masculine traits, but wins in the end because she is pure. Usually the final girl is a virgin. Thus, the death by sex trope, in which if characters are seen having sex in a horror movie, it means they're going to die. Despite having much more female presence in films than other genres, horror movies still have a unique way of punishing women for their sexuality. In the face of painting women's sexuality as monstrous, we have Daughters of Darkness and The Witch. These two movies have their female leads as vampires or witches, respectively, but they do so to reclaim female sexuality, not condemn it. They take the concept of the pure final girl and turn it on its head, how they create fear of the supernatural. The audience must be convinced that the supernatural is real and that it's more dangerous than they ever could have thought. The first key that helps convince the audience is the setting. Both films take place in an isolated, off-kilter location. The Witch completely isolates the family. When they are kicked out of the colony, they travel deep into the woods and live completely alone. This serves to remove the story from reality and transport the audience to a new world. The story exists in a void, a liminal space where anything could happen. The woods surrounding the family are dangerous and unending. Eggers was able to create this atmosphere due to meticulous attention to detail. He believed, we have to go back to this time if we're going to believe in a witch. Looking at the mise-en-scène, there was no makeup and all of the costumes were period accurate and made with accurate materials. All the items in the house, from the wood of the house to the blankets, were made accurately and with the materials Puritans would have had. It had to be a Puritan's nightmare. He used completely natural lighting, and all of these factors created the authenticity that drew the audience into the world and convinced them that a witch was real and was scary. He used the Alexa Plus camera with a 1:66 ratio. He said this ratio is perfect as it allowed more height for the trees. The tree's height is incredibly important to make the characters, and therefore the audience, feel trapped and watched. That can best be seen in the scene where Thomasin's brother, Caleb, is lost in the woods. It starts in a wide establishing shot, with Caleb's body barely taking up a fifth of the screen, while the trees don't fit inside the shot. The camera dollies in, pressing into him as anxiety and fear suffocate him. Further shots in the scene shoot in wide shots from behind the trees as if he's being watched and followed by an ominous creature in the woods. The camera takes a low angle to emphasize the trees looming above Caleb. The trees constantly loom over the characters, symbolic of the looming dread and fear of the witch hanging over the characters. Daughters of Darkness is also set in an isolated setting. The couple ends up at a lavish hotel during the off-season. The hotel is eerily abandoned. Other than the man at the front desk, Countess Batory and Ilona are the only people the couple can interact with. The film establishes this eerie, off-kilter tone with its wide shots of the empty resort. It is a lavish and fancy place, clearly meant to house many, so its stark emptiness disorients the viewer. While The Witch creates an environment where a witch is believable by demanding complete time accuracy and creating a stark, antiquated world, Daughters of Darkness does the opposite. Daughters of Darkness pulls the audience into a brand new world with its flashy, glamorous, and artistic style. It uses mise-en-scène to create a gothic, erotic art house style that pulls the viewer into a different world where vampires dress in sparkly gowns. Countess Batory herself is the best use of this art house mise-en-scène. Her outfits are lavish, outlandish, and powerful. The set design is also incredibly characteristic of European art house, with the glamorous and luxurious French hotel. If trees are looming over the family and the witch, then murder is looming over the couple in Daughters of Darkness. They read in a local newspaper of grisly murders of young girls happening in the town nearby, their throats cut. This creates a foreboding and dangerous tone. The supernatural and sexuality. While the environment and mise-en-scène contribute to the fearful atmosphere, the main horror of both films are their supernatural elements. However, the supernatural and the sexual are invariably tied together in these movies. In The Witch, our first introduction to a witch is through Caleb. When lost in the woods, he stumbles upon a witch in her hut. Young Caleb has been starting to realize his own sexuality, constantly throwing glances at the only young woman available to him, his sister, Thomasin. Thus, he is further seduced by the attractive witch in the woods. In this Puritan world, witch equals sexuality, and both lead to hell. Thomasin throughout the movie is accused of being both a temptress and a witch. Her mother wants to send her away now that she has grown into maturity and is distracting her brother. Thomasin is actually the most pure of the whole family, though, and does not mean to seduce and does not want to be sent away. Later in the movie, Thomasin's mother grows insane with jealousy and suspicion and accuses Thomasin of trying to seduce her own father. While Thomasin is accused of being a seductress, she's also accused of being a witch. Her mother blames her for the baby's disappearance, for the disappearance of a family heirloom, and later on accuses her of being a witch after Caleb becomes possessed. These two accusations happen in conjunction with each other, demonstrating the belief of most horror movies that sexuality is evil. Daughters of Darkness initially does the same. Countess Bathory is clearly dangerous and clearly sensual. She describes an old ancestor, a countess who went down in history for killing women and bleeding them to stay young. This ancestor is based on the real-life Countess Bathory, but in the movie this ancestor is actually the vampire in front of us. She tells the story while tracing her hands along Stefan's chest, equating this violence with eroticism. Bathory herself is evil and sexuality incarnate. Director Kummel calls her a dictator and said he dressed her in the Nazi colors. Her mise-en-scène element of color scheme establishes her as dangerous with her black, white, and red colors, but it also establishes her as sexy. However, these movies contrast other horror films by not punishing their leading ladies for embracing the darkness and sexuality. Both heroines, Valerie and Thomasin, start extremely repressed and innocent, but end liberated by embracing their supernatural titles. This turns the trope of the final girl on its head, leaving every character dead but the final girl, who has become a creature of power and is embraced by her own sexuality. Through the course of this movie, Valerie's husband Stefan has become increasingly violent, leading to him abusing her physically and sexually. Valerie turns to Countess Bathory, falling for her seductions. The Countess turns Valerie into a vampire, and they kill Stefan after he violently lashes out again. The two drink his blood. Valerie and the Countess drive off together in love. However, when the sun rises, the Countess dies violently. In the final scene, we find Valerie sometime later. Her style has changed, more reminiscent of the Countess with her vampire cape, but not as flashy. She's at a wedding. She has a newlywed couple hand in hand, leading them off. She has taken up the mantle of the Countess as a seductress, a vampire, a creature of danger, and she is much better off for it. With Stefan, she was constantly dismissed and belittled, abused and beat. Now she is a dangerous creature, and no one can hurt her. She's embraced both her own sexuality and the danger she can pose to others for it, and has reclaimed it as her own. She is the final girl because the writers could not kill her if they wanted to. She has come into her own power, because female sexuality is powerful. Women are powerful, and now she will never be helpless at the hand of a man again. In The Witch, Thomasin faces a similar fate. One by one, her family is picked off, whether from supernatural causes or her own forced hand in self-defense. She is left alone, everyone she knows is dead. Then the goat, Black Phillip, comes to her. It is revealed that he has been the devil all along. He asks her if she wants the taste of butter, a pretty dress. Through the film, Thomasin has been the only one in the family with a slight taste for the finer things in life. She remembers the stained glass windows they used to have and longs for life back in England. Her family has guilted her for having desires, though, and repressed any agency or desires she may have. When the devil comes to her, he asks if she wants to live deliciously. She says yes. She disrobes for him, the first time she's been naked on screen. She signs her name to him, then walks naked through the woods. She's met with a coven of other witches, and they are flying. After being oppressed and villainized through the whole movie, even though she was always innocent, she finally allows herself to be free. She joins the liberated women and admits that she has desires. By embracing the desires she has, by losing the shame of nudity, she has finally become free. Everyone who shamed her and demonized her is dead, and she is the final girl, finally comfortable in her own body. To conclude, Daughters of Darkness takes a much more liberated, sensual approach to sexuality with European art house influences. The Witch commits to period accuracy to create a Puritan nightmare that in the end defies the Puritan repression. The Witch and Daughters of Darkness both create a horror-filled atmosphere in order to conflate sexuality with the supernatural, and lead to their female leads defying the final girl trope by reclaiming their own power through sexuality.